Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I can't believe we didn't have any still technical difficulties this time. I know, fingers crossed, actually. Not one was.
It'll be good.
It's true. We are very happy to have Sophia Etier here today to talk with us. I've seen Sophia give a number of talks, so when this came about, I was very happy because you are a very engaging speaker and you have a lot of knowledge. Sophia's finishing her degree at the university right now, her PhD defending in April, so everybody give her lots of love. She's also the vice president of Preserve Historic Missoula, which is an organization we've done a lot with that we really love, both at Historical Research Associates and at Montana Archaeological Society. So without further ado, thank you, Sophia, for being here and
All right, thank you so much for coming. I am super excited to chat with you all tonight about heritage adaptation in Western Montana Chinese communities, roughly between about 1860 and 1990. Though before I want to start, I do want to thank Jeannie and the Montana Archaeological Society for hosting me tonight. It's such a pleasure. Oh no. Hold on.
it was working beautifully right before this.
Maybe they just sit there. No, no. Cool. Now let me get that out of the way. In my tour programs and in my other public programs, I do always like to kind of ground us in what kind of demographics we're working with. So with that being said, what did Montana demographically look like between the late 19th century and the early 20th century? Now there's a lot of writing on this page, but I'll walk everyone through it. So this is our state Chinese population. So you can see in 1890, we have a state Chinese population of right around 2,500, roughly 1.8% of the state's population. But as you can see, as we move forward decade by decade, we continue to drop in population. Now, I must note, the state's overall population was rapidly increasing, but at the same time, the state's Chinese population was steadily decreasing. Largely due to societal pressures, such as the anti-Chinese legislation and ideologies of this time period. So while you can see we do have a steady decline until we kind of hit stagnation around 1950, so the post-World War II era. But then we kind of go into a little bit of an increase by 1980 and eventually by 1990 as well. Along the sides, you can see 1870 with 1900, which is actually 9.39% of the territorial population. 1880, 4.84%. Now, something critical happens in 1882 and 1875. So in 1875, we have the Page Act passed, which essentially gives any U.S. port authority the authority to deny entry to any Asian woman coming into the United States if they deemed she was coming into the country not under her own free will or as a prostitute. Now, there was no strong legal representation for that, so it was just based on the opinion of the Port Authority. So we drastically see the entry of Asian women into the United States drop. And at one point, there are 19 Chinese men to every one Chinese woman. And then in 1882, we have the Chinese Exclusion Act, which essentially states now all male laborers coming into the United States cannot obtain labor positions. Now, between about 1848 and 1882, we have Chinese laborers coming particularly from the Guangdong province in southern China to work in mines, to work along the railway, even in lumber camps, so more resource jobs. After 1882, this cannot happen. So we do see occupation expansion going into steam laundries, restaurants, gardens, working in domestic residences, even doctors. So we do see a lot of merchants as well. So we see a huge shift after that 1882, which does contribute to this decline. Now, if you do look at the brackets on the side, you can see we have the 1892 Gary Act. The Chinese Exclusion Act was only supposed to take place for 10 years. It was re-upped in 1892, and it was re-upped again and made permanent in 1902. Now, if we keep going down, we can see that we have World War I happen, the 1924 Immigration Act, which barred the immigration of all Asian immigrants into the United States. We then have World War II. We then have the Chinese Exclusion Act repealed, as well as the Gary Act repealed about 1943. But if you'll notice, the Page Act is not repealed until 1975. So we do have some extenuating legislation that is continually prohibiting Chinese inhabitants in the United States. And we're also getting political cartooning. The one on the bottom may be a little relevant to today's politics, is the Chinese wall around the United States of America. We also have nationalist government and communists, a plague on both your houses. So you can see there's a lot of anti-Asian, anti-Chinese rhetoric at this time, which does give decline to this population. But for the time period today, we'll be working in this early 1870, 1880 area. Missoula's population in particular, it disappears between 1940 and 1950, the historic population. Around 1941, we have a new wave of immigration coming into Missoula, so the population is kind of rebolstered in the city, but I'll explain that in a little bit. Now, I love these pictures because it shows such diverse occupation and lifestyle for Chinese immigrants at this time. Over here, we have more of the placer mining, or more of that aqua-based mining. We have railway work, merchants, gardeners, cooks, and even surgeons as well. Many of those photos were taken in Butte and in Helena, but also Virginia City and throughout the state. Now, this presentation will mostly focus on the role of restaurant owners and cooks, because I could talk all day about the amazing history that Chinese history has in Montana. Now, for the beginning of the Missoula area ethnic cluster, we really start to see Western Montana have Chinese populations from about 1865 to about 1867. Now, it's currently believed that the first Chinese immigrants arrived into the Western Montana region after gold was found in southwestern Montana around cities like Virginia City and Bannock. Now, these accounts on the right-hand side come from the journals of Major John Owen. If you're familiar with Stevensville history, I always like to make the joke that he was not a major and it was not a military fort. It's a little funny. But we do see in the second journal, John Owen is mentioning hired a Missoula Chinese man for a cook for $10 per week. Now, again, this is down the Mid-River Valley. We do have an incident between Owen's miller for striking the cook. And actually, the miller was discharged after that assault. And we do see that the Chinese cook's wounds were actually tended to by the physician of Fort Owen. We do see paid $110 for 11 weeks of service. But the most important part, I think, is the very last entry. Major Owen's cook actually goes to Missoula to see a brother in the city. So that really is stating that we do have a population forming right around 1865, 1866, 1867. We do know that another cook was hired and operated through the spring of 1871. with some Chinese presence at Fort Owen continuously for about 4 years. Now, as you know, Fort Owen service kind of fell out of service, and we do see the ethnic population move back up towards Missoula more predominantly. But we do have this picture right here, which is actually a mine claim from Missoula County in 1871. And in 1871 as well, this is a store ledger for cash, buying miscellaneous supplies. So we do have a really early history of a Chinese presence in the city at this time. Now, this newspaper clipping comes from the Montana Post. I love that its tagline was "the only paper in the Montana Territory." That's because there was not very many people here at that time. But this is coming out of Virginia City on October 28th, 1865. Now, this is what I have found so far, and as I should mention, this research is ongoing, but it's the first mention of specific food items in Montana from this immigrant community. Now, this specifically is talking about the funeral of Ah Tong, and the food items included are rice, pork, chopsticks, candies, grapes, apples, brandy, and Chinese tea. Now, the really cool thing about this is that this is indicating that a merchant is importing goods at this point still. We don't have a very large population overall. We have an even smaller Chinese population. So this indicates a trait of heritage retention. These Chinese laborers are bringing traditional foods, traditional utensils with them as they move from places like California over into Montana. Now, I will say these items are traditionally found in Chinese burial practices along graveside services, particularly Southern Chinese practices. And I will say I could talk even more about that, but that is another talk for a different day. Oh no, I moved the mouse again. There we go. All right, so typical Southern Chinese ingredients would have been imported by merchants, which really helped bolster heritage retention, as well as some aspects of heritage adaptation. Now, on this side, we have more traditional ingredients that were being imported to Southern California Chinese districts, specifically places like San Francisco and Los Angeles. I like to give the visual of just how bountiful these ingredients were. So we have dried abalone down here, we have sea cucumber, congee up there, preserved red bean curd, pickled vegetables, and also salt eggs. Now on the other side, we have different breeds of animals that were living and being raised in Southern China for food production, as well as, meat production, egg production, those kinds of things. Particularly, we have big-headed carp. I will say it's a very interesting looking fish. And all of the fish species coming out of the Southern Chinese coast are very, very fascinating to look at, I will say. We also have Southern yellow cattle, as well as Maishan pigs as well. So it gives you a little insight about what traditional food items were being consumed and how different they are from the food that was being consumed later. Now, I do want to mention that merchants were established in the United States in the earliest waves of immigration between 1848 and 1849. And they were responsible for bringing over these food items to ethnic clusters in the United States. But when we look at more of the animal products, it's important to mention that some were only eaten twice a year or maybe once a month due to expense and availability. But also, some ingredients were only consumed during celebrations like Lunar New Year. Now we also have really cool other dishes, varnished or barbecue pork. We have shark fin soup. We have bird's nest soup and pickled duck head. And I do want you to visually see these different dishes because when we talk about chop suey and chow mein later on, you will see just how much they changed over time due to the conditions that these Chinese immigrants were living in. I'm never gonna get this right. There we go. All right, so within my paper that I actually wrote for this presentation, or I guess other way around, I wrote a paper and then created a presentation. I did study 3 archaeological sites to show a progression of heritage adaptation over time. The first one being the Cedar Creek and China Gulch area. As you can see by my lovely Google Maps snapshot, you can see Cedar Creek and you can see the China Gulch site right over there. Now, this is located in Mineral County near the historic 9 Mile mining district, which attracted thousands of Chinese miners to Western Montana after gold was found. China Gulch was occupied between the 1870s and 1900. Then it was redeveloped between the 1920s and 1930s. It was incredibly profitable, pulling $2 million worth of gold out of Cedar Creek. Now, the larger occupations included Louisville and China Gulch, with Chinese miners taking over abandoned claims after they were pushed out of Idaho mining districts. Now, it's estimated that at the height of the district between 1870 and 1880, when we have both European and Asian miners coming into this area, it housed over 1,600 people in this small area. Now, this is an artistic rendition of the Chinese Gulch area. So we can see Chinese miners working in the Cedar Creek area. We do have basic campsites. We do have some habitation going across the hillside as well. But I do love to be able to bring this into this, just to be able to visually see kind of the area that these individuals would have been living in. Now, Montana newspapers regularly track the migration to Cedar Creek, as well as the settlement's composition. It was reported that China Gulch boasted a meat shop, as well as a Chinese doctor brought in from San Francisco, as well as several domestic dwellings and basic campsites. Though seemingly bountiful, most profit was absorbed by mining expenses and living costs. They're having to bring food in, they're having to bring supplies in, and while they did pull $2 million over time out of Cedar Creek, it was a very impoverished area. Now we can see that this is a Hearth Quadrant excavation conducted originally in the 1990s by the U.S. Forest Service, but then again by archaeologist Chris Merritt and a team as well in 2007. And they did identify around 8 hearths in this excavation. So we do have some structures left, if a hearth can be part of a structure, I will say. But we do have still some standing physical items of this community. Now, this is my favorite part, I will say. As I mentioned, it was initially surveyed by the U.S. Forest Service in 1995, and then again by now Utah State Historic Preservation Officer Chris Merritt in 2007. It was excavated in 4 single-site quadrants, and Merritt's team uncovered over 1,500 artifacts, as well as relocated 8 stone hearths. They found fire-cracked rock and calcinated faunal remains. So we do have a lot of evidence of mammalian faunal remains being cooked and eaten and consumed in these sites. Now, roughly 350 faunal remains were found, with a considerable number exhibiting signs of cooking, such as saw marks, butchery marks, or calcination, or that darkening when something is cooked in a hot fire. The faunal remains were suspected to be mammalian in origin, ranging from sheep, goat, and pig to raccoon, deer, and bison in size as well. We also did find, they did find eggshell fragments. But what was interesting is what was not found. Now, I will say you can see butchering marks on this larger piece of bone right here. And you can also see butchering marks on this side of the bone, as well as pot polish, again, indicating cooking and consumption. I love this picture the best. I did tell Chris Merritt when I got this photo, I'm like, can I please have this photo from your report? Because it is a pile of calcinated fossil remains. So you can see more of the burnt bone up at the top and more of just the bone pieces down at the bottom of the pile. But it really does show human activity at this site. Now, I also love this one too. If you can't tell, got its own page. While hundreds of fossil remains were found, interestingly, there were no remains of birds or fish found. So we do see that fish play a large part in traditional Chinese cuisine. It is not present in this particular site. Now, this did indicate that Cedar Creek's Chinese population was forced to adapt to consume locally resourced proteins due to isolation and poverty conditions. Lack of preparation knowledge led to documented times of scurvy and starvation as well. Now, in this site, Merritt and his team also found rice bowls, pieces of celadon, and opium can fragments that indicated consistent levels of heritage retention alongside forest heritage adaptation. So this Chinese population is trying to retain as much heritage as possible while being forced to adapt due to conditions and location. Now we come to site number 2, the Butte Chinatown site. Now I will say, again, lovely Google Maps screenshot. Love Google Maps. In the summer of 2007, the Butte Chinatown excavation was conducted by the Renewable Technologies team under the supervision of Mitzi Rosalon in partnership with the Maiwa Society on the corner of Mercury and Colorado. So this lot right here, you can see the Maiwa Societies right up there. To learn more about Butte Chinatown, which would have extended into this area, this kind of upper block right here. As you can see, the Pekin Noodle Parlor is up there still. So that's the kind of block that the Chinatown would have sat on. Now, this was a traditional vertical excavation that uncovered over 60,000 artifacts, ranging from game pieces, hygiene items, ceramics, glass, and crockery. Ranging between about 1890 and the 1920s. And if you've ever been to Butte, if you haven't, I recommend it. But you can see the Maiwa Noodle Parlor, Chop Suey, as I'll talk about in a little bit, but also the Thai company on the side. So we do actually see an expansion of profit and business in Chinatown just with these two businesses right here. They are beautiful standing brick structures. If you haven't seen them, I highly recommend it. The Maiwa Museum, right down here, is open during the summer, and it is an incredible experience to see even more artifacts that were pulled out of this site. Some stayed with the Maiwa, some were sent to the Montana Historical Society, but the Maiwa has done a wonderful job about preserving Chinese heritage in Montana. They recently had a Lunar New Year celebration through downtown Butte, which is phenomenal. Again, I believe it's called the coldest parade on earth. But if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. Jeannie, you had that technology talk. Now, this is just a picture of the commercial lot and domestic space excavation. So we can see vertical excavation right here. This is actually part of a booklet that was put together after the excavation was concluded, which you can see so many of the cool artifacts, the types of items that were found. One of my favorite photos from this site is actually you can see a layer where bottles are just falling out of the earth, which is really cool. And I also think it's notable to mention because it shows that, again, human activity was in this area. If you drive down that street and maybe go to Pork Chop John's to enjoy a sandwich, you might not recognize it, but it is just an empty lot on the end now. There was so much activity and so much life in this area that I think this excavation represents. Now I love this photo. These are pieces of celadon that were found in the excavation. But unlike the China Gulch excavation, very few faunal items were found. The culinary remnants instead consisted of peach, summer squash, Chinese winter melon, Chinese olive, lychee seeds, peanut shells, lizard bones, and one cuttle bone from a cuttlefish. Now, this does indicate that a larger, more prosperous population had access to a thriving merchant class, as well as the ability to outsource food production to restaurant owners and cooks as well. This indicates that a balance is starting to form between heritage retention, so retaining that cultural identity and adapting to the location over time. I do love this picture as well, because among rice bowls and restaurant ware and pieces of celadon, as I mentioned, porcelain items were also found, like this teacup that exhibited the 8 Immortals design. Now, as I mentioned, some artifacts are still at the Maiwa, some are still in the Montana Historical Society, but the really cool thing is that you can still interact with these items today. Google snapshot, once again. I promise this is the last one. But this is the Cranky Sam Public House site. So actually, right down the street from where we are today, just a block down. In this location, right here, if you have not been to Cranky Sam Public House, I do recommend it. It is very good. But in 2019, due to the construction of the Cranky Sam Public House, the Dixon Archaeology Lab was brought to West Main Street in order to conduct salvage archaeology. Now, conducted by anthropologists such as Kelly Dixon, Nikki Manning, Emily Miek, and Kate Gonzalez, this excavation was intended to retrieve as many artifacts as possible for the commercial development of the site and the pouring of concrete in the back. Now, this trench-style excavation recovered thousands of artifacts belonging to both Missoula's historic Chinese as well as restricted or red light populations with a significant number of faunal remains. I did take this picture in 2019. I forgot about it, and then I found it, and I was like, wow, I just really like the brick in that photo, but it's useful now. The faunal remains recovered at this site, so as you can see, it is definitely not what Cranky Sam Public House looks like now. There's no fairy lights, there's no chairs, there's no fire. It was really kind of a dumping ground for the businesses on West Main Street. But this particular portion of West Main housed a thriving ethnic cluster from about 1865 to about 1945. Now, we did have a Joss temple or an incense house down where the auto garage is. It actually was located on the top floor of the Star Lodging House, owned by Madam Mary Gleim. Unfortunately, that was abandoned by 1910, but we had several dwellings. The site where Cranky Sam sits was believed to be a mercantile, but one of my favorite anecdotes about this site is that on the porch of the store, it was said that they had kites fly over West Main Street in the shape of eagles and dragons and lions, beautiful golden kites. And so I always like to have my tour guests imagine when we walk down this area to imagine a thriving, bustling ethnic cluster with kites just soaring above you. During times of Lunar New Year, you would have heard music and chanting. You would have had fireworks as well. So this was really a strong community. So it does not represent what this picture represents. That is very different. The faunal remains recovered at this site not only exhibited signs of modification, such as butchery marks, but also exhibited advanced traits of heritage adaptation, where items were being consumed that represented a diet of local, national, and internationally sourced faunal materials. Remains belonging to things like provolone, clams, mussels, oysters, crabs, cuttlefish, carp, Chinese white herring, yellow croaker, turtle, and even bear. Now, this mixture of culinary remnants indicates a long-term adaptation to locally sourced proteins, as well as items that were then being brought in by merchants from the Pacific coast, as well as the Chinese coast as well. So we do see a retention of traditional aquatic proteins like bivalves and mollusks that were likely sourced from the Pacific Ocean. I love this picture so much. This is fragments of cuttlebone from a cuttlefish. It would have been one of the primary bony components of a relatively gelatinous animal. We also have very beautiful oyster shells that were found. These pictures do come from Sarah Grenfell's master's thesis in 2024 that had beautiful pictures of some of these faunal materials. There also is mussel shells. We do see bear paw fragments, but also my favorite, crab claw. It's believed that this was Dungeness crab claw, which could have only been procured on the Pacific coast. Now, this is a little bit of audience participation. Raise your hand if you recognize this. Yes. I'll say again. Raise your hand if you've ever eaten this. Yes. So my question to you is this chop suey and chow mein? Kind of. It's a little bit. But it does not look like these dishes. Raise your hand if you've ever had these dishes before. Wonderful. Now, as you can see by the excitement, chop suey and chow mein. So we do see that heritage adaptation is still even ongoing with the emergence of canned chop suey and chow mein. Now, this is one of my favorite photos. Again, audience participation. Has anybody been to Michi Ramen or Sakatumi down on West Front Street? Wonderful. You've been to the historic location of Sam's Cafe. Now, after the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, the United States' Chinese immigrants required American buy-in to financially support their businesses. Now, traditional restaurants were used to eat, conduct business, participate in politics, as well as uphold cultural memory and identity as well. Prior to this, Americans were largely critical of Chinese immigrants due to their presumed exotic dishes and eating utensils, ranging from chopsticks to the myth of Chinese laborers eating various meats as well. This is actually how chop suey came to be born. Though no one can really agree on when and where the dish originated, it is broadly accepted that it originated in San Francisco, which boasted one of the largest, and still to this day, beautiful Chinese districts in the United States between about 1886 and 1896. Now, this was a dish sometimes called beggar's hash or fried scraps, usually consisting of wok fried vegetables, sometimes chicken or pork, and a thick savory sauce that took the nation by storm. I will say a lot of the legend does have chop suey being served to impatient miners that demanded dinner after the business was closed or food was done. And so it's believed that Chinese cooks would just throw the rest of what they had in and serve it. But chop suey was then being consumed by the nation's socialites of the time. You could see chop suey in restaurants like this and in grand ballrooms as well. Now, by the turn of the 20th century, Chinese restaurants were commonly referred to as chop suey houses or noodle parlors. And I do love looking at old pictures because even if you don't have historic maps, if you see chop suey house or noodle parlor, it gives you a little indication of what existed there. Now, this allowed Chinese immigrants to persevere against anti-Chinese rhetoric and federal exclusion through the utilization of traditional culinary knowledge that wanted to bring about harmonious dishes as well that were adapted to Western tastes. Now, I do love this because Sam's Cafe was at the forefront of West Front Street. So Upper West Front Street, the 100 block, was more of cigar rooms, different types of restaurants. You had the Mascot Theater, which had a reputation for patrons fighting employees and employees fighting patrons. It burned down. The city of Missoula said, please never rebuild this. They're like, okay, cool. You had the Schilling Taylor Company in the Capitol Beer Hall, where Montgomery Distillery is located today, which the Schilling brothers were responsible for never rebuilding the Mascot Theater. But you also had Sam's Cafe. Now, Sam's Cafe was started in 1912 by a man named Sam Young. Now, I will say, there are lots of Sams in Missoula's Chinese history. They are not all the same. Cranky Sam, not Sam Young, that's actually Sam Wung. We also had Sam Tom, who was a merchant on West Main Street as well. Now, Sam's Cafe was incredibly important because it was run by Sam Young until 1920, when he sold it to his nephew, H. Dirk Yu, who ran it until 1940, before his retirement. It's said that he retired around the age of 85 or 86. And after his retirement, he was not forced out of location. It was a choice to retire this restaurant. And he went on to Butte, but he could have also gone on to Seattle as well. He does disappear from the historical record at this point. But Sam's Cafe was known for having cheap meals that anybody who walked in the door could afford and could eat at. Now I did, as I mentioned, write a publication on this, well, publication and presentation, they go together. And I do mention the fact that we do see in the historical record a lot of college clubs having their meetings at Sam's Cafe, or businessmen meeting at Sam's Cafe. So this really was a local spot to come and enjoy some delicious food, but also Chinese heritage as well. Now, I will ask, does anybody recognize this building? Did anybody go to this restaurant? Wonderful. I do always love to point out the Golden Pheasant, because if you do walk by Faruqi's today, you can still see the architectural detailing on this building, even though the Golden Pheasant is not there currently. Now I'll ask an even more interesting question. Does anybody know who this lady is? Wonderful. Now I will introduce you to Ruby Wong, for those of you who do not know. Born in 1899, Ruby Wong immigrated to the United States as a young girl, as her father worked as an interpreter for the Seattle-based U.S. Immigration Office. Now, research suggests that between 14 and 16, she became a picture bride in an arranged marriage to a truck gardener named Wong On-ki and Helena, who was estimated to be roughly 40 years her senior. Now, by the time she was 25, she was widowed after the passing of Wong On-ki with 4 children, and she needed a way to support her family. So she began to work in cafes in Helena. Now, particularly, we do know that she worked in the Yacht Sun Cafe, as well as the OK Cafe. This experience is where she actually met future business partner Kim Ming. Now, in 1941, Wong and Ming opened the Golden Pheasant on Higgins Avenue with a grand opening that newspapers estimated served 400 customers until 3 in the morning, with lines going all the way down the block, even though it was bitter cold.
What year was it?
1941,
Okay.
Yes. Now, the Golden Pheasant would take a hit as we did enter World War II, right after the opening of the Golden Pheasant, with Wong and Ming working long hours, but still loyally serving customers. The Golden Pheasant was known for 50-cent pork chop suey, 50-cent grand Sunday dinners, a 25-cent Denver sandwich, and a multi-course house dinner for $1, which included a beverage. Now, I will say I do bring these presentations sometimes to public schools, and I always ask, could you eat this much good food for 50 cents nowadays? And one kid replied to me one time, I couldn't even breathe for 50 cents. So it's interesting to have them put that into context as well. Yes?
What corner was that on?
That's, oh, I don't know the cross street.
It's
this
north of
Bruce?
Broadway.
Broadway?
It's north of Broadway and
Yeah.
Hagen. The next one on, it's
an alley.
there's,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's an
there's
alley.
Lord's Julie used to be there, and then
Yeah,
there's a
yeah,
bike
yeah.
shop, and then the alley, and then that's right there.
I'm really good at history. I'm really bad at directions. But between 1941 and her death in 1984, Ruby Wong became a staple for Missoulians, known for her hospitality, her loyal rapport with returning customers, as well as her attempt to bring back traditional celebrations and customs, like serving tea and Lunar New Year celebrations, while the historic ethnic cluster was receding, but a new ethnic population was forming. All right. Oh, is it really? I love this.
I have hundreds of these postcards.
I found this one on eBay. It was the only picture I could find that was actually showing the whole building.
Yeah, I have that dress.
Oh my gosh, this is wonderful. Okay, so I will say, we're gonna get to that. Did anybody else go to Ming's?
Yeah.
It's where K-Pax is located now.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Does anybody who know who this man is? Now, alongside Ruby Wong was her business partner, Kim Ming, whom she met while working in Helena cafes, who also immigrated from southern China at the turn of the 20th century. Together, they ran the Golden Pheasant until Ming was bought out in 1959, leading to the opening of Ming's by July of 1961. Now, together, they would run an incredibly amazing business that really bolstered Chinese heritage in Missoula. Now, Ming would successfully open up restaurants across the Midwest and receive several awards for hospitality and culinary excellence before his own death in 1989. Now, I do want to say one thing about this picture. Does anybody have a guess of where that picture was taken? Just a random guess. Yeah, do you know where?
No, is that in the old Bon Marché?
Next door.
Oh.
That picture was taken in the basement of the business right next to us when Chinese writing was found in the wall or written on the wall in the 1950s. Kim Ming was brought in to translate the writing on the wall, which is believed to be in Taishanese, which would have been the dialect that Chinese immigrants were speaking at this time, as well as dialect that's still spoken in Chinatowns across the United States and in Canada as well. Now, the cool thing is, for those who know me, I do love a good basement. I do love a really good basement. I think this is probably the best basement in Missoula. We do see Chinese characters written on the wall. We also see Japanese characters and English writing on the wall as well. So we're actively trying to decipher the translations of the wall, because when Kim Ming translated the characters, he basically said that they were like 19th century Yelp reviews. Great for restaurants, great catering, fresh vegetables. And we don't know a lot about this space. We do know that it is believed to have existed as early as about 1867. But what's even cooler about this basement is that there is a Lunar New Year poster thought to be on the wall from about 1871. It is still on the wall. So this research is evolving every single day. But we have Kim Ming to thank for starting this process.
So this space still exists as we're seeing it now, next door?
Yeah,
It
if I
hasn't
walked far enough through this wall, I would go down to that basement. It's literally on the other side of this.
Oh.
Isn't that amazing?
been- So it hasn't been
Nope.
renovated or?
Nope. One thing that's amazing is that Tara, who owns FMC Books next door, is working with me actively to preserve and translate the space. So we'll have another chapter of Kim Ming's legacy, hopefully within the next couple of years. Now, dishes like chop suey and the perseverance of Western Chinese communities to adapt their culinary practices and their heritage allowed other restaurants to thrive, such as the Montana Cafe in Hamilton. Now, the Montana Cafe was known for their incredible service and delicious food between 1893 and 1983. I love in Missoulian newspapers, they also state they had the best of the West custard pie and cinnamon rolls as well. The restaurant was owned by the Lee and Hom families, the majority of its existence. But if you've ever been to Knapp's on Main Street in Hamilton, this building right here, that's where Knapp's is located today. Now, you still can see the famous neon sign at the Raleigh County Museum, put up in the 1940s. It's estimated that that was the first neon sign in the city of Hamilton. I have an even better picture of it, because if you're a country music fan, you would know this album, the Hank Williams Jr. Montana Cafe album, which I think does justice to how beautiful that neon sign is. I did take that picture as well. Lights were off.
Those are my aunt and uncles.
Best talk ever.
They're really related, but they were like from the other Chinese family. That's
who my favorite night is. Well, you'll enjoy this picture. Now, I do love this picture because Harry Hom, brother of Jim Lee, using an abacus. I don't know how to use an abacus to calculate bills. I also took the pictures. So also, if you didn't know, you're actually coming to a photography gallery and not just a history talk. But we also have the longest continuously operated Chinese restaurant in the United States, Butte's Peking Noodle Parlor. And I love their sign. Another example of beautiful neon signage that does have chop suey on it. Now, Butte's Peking Noodle Parlor has been owned and it still is owned and operated by the Tam family since 1911. In its earliest days, the restaurant served chop suey, chow mein, and lo mein to the mining community, as well as running a gambling parlor in the basement. Now, while it is owned by Jerry Tam currently, the modern legacy of the restaurant is often attributed to his father, Danny Wong, who ran the restaurant for over 60 years. And I love an anecdote that was shared about Danny Wong, which if you go to Butte, Danny Wong Way is behind the Peking Noodle Parlor. And it was renamed after his death. And it was said that Danny Wong would serve anybody. If you didn't have money, you could still eat. And I think that really shows not only the perseverance of Chinese communities in Western Montana and across the United States, but just the strong sense of heritage and community as well. I did take the picture in the middle. But we do have scenes from across Montana. We do have actually the company, oh, I'm not tall enough, right there, versus where the Maiwan Noodle Parlor would have been added next to. We do have the interior of that store. We do have a cook returning from the garden to make the meal for the evening. And then it's a lovely gentleman in Virginia City. Are you related to him? Oh, now I do want to say thank you for coming and remembering the forgotten, as well as seeing the unseen. And the next time you enjoy some delicious Chinese food, I hope you take a second to reflect on the path that it took for that food to get to where you are. Thank you.
We have time for questions if folks have some questions.
Yes.
I noticed in the first menu list of items that you skipped over the plug of tobacco and the Chinese cigarettes. And I wouldn't skip tobacco products when you're looking at food items, because it's always paired with, you know, that economy of desire.
Yes.
And it suppresses appetite. So a lot of workers, when they couldn't afford food, would be smoking tobacco. And the tobacco products, I mean, I would have loved to have known what Chinese cigarettes were, what was in them that would have made them Chinese cigarettes. So I think you need to broaden the foodstuff list to include drugs.
Yeah, I do want to say I did just focus on the particular foodstuffs that were featured, because in the long story of how we have the evolution of chop suey and chow mein, I really wanted to emphasize that we are relying at a point imported food goods into an isolated mining area. So that's why I specifically focused on the ingredients, because it really shows that rice is still being brought in, candies are still being brought in, Chinese tea and brandy are still being brought in. So we see a progression of heritage retention and cultural identity and memory just through the specific food items.
But don't you think the Chinese cigarettes might have been produced in Asia?
I would have to do more research on that.
That would be interesting to find out what was it that made them Chinese.
Yeah, and that could be,
Because it could have been spices.
that could be definitely research for later on. Yes.
Just for information too, our family owned Wings, and so you can see in the Wing Look Museum in Seattle, they have the records of my family and a bunch of other restaurants in Montana purchasing things through somebody in Seattle and bringing them here to Missoula. Yeah, and that was like, 60s.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's one thing that if you do choose to read the publication that I will have out, I believe this fall on this, I go way more in depth with this this story. And it's really cool that you mentioned that, because I really show that the merchant class, having an established merchant class, really allowed that heritage retention to start to facilitate a lot more, because these laborers, these families, these individuals had access to international markets. So that's wonderful. Thank you for telling me that.
And a lot of things when my parents died, everybody's like, oh, these are like antiques and like worth lots of money from China. I'm like, no. My parents came, our family came with nothing. So all the Chinese goods that they had in their homes basically were from like a catalog out of San Francisco that they were purchasing stuff for the restaurant, for decoration and whatnot. Or we go to Canada and they bring stuff home.
Yeah.
It wasn't like they immigrated and they got that stuff from China.
Yeah, I do love the picture of this, the walks. This is actually the front of the Maiwa Museum, because we do have that sign of home of the best Chinese cuisine. But I also just love, because they did, when they were renovating those buildings, as well as when they were doing that site excavation, they did keep items that were found like in the attics. So that is quite fascinating. I really thank you for that input. One of my favorite anecdotes about that building is that it is actually really typical of Chinese structures, because it had a false floor in between the top floor and the lower floor that was rented out for people to stay up there. So,
and if you stand up, I think on the third floor where they have the big thing where the walks were, the imprints of the cook's feet, because they're like in the wood floor, like you can stand where you can stand, like 2 sets of them in front of the big walks.
I would recommend it if you guys have not, and I will say this, I have not actually been able to catch it being open. I just really stand outside, I'm like, wow, it's so beautiful.
Going against glass.
Yeah, I'm just like, let me in.
The counter is like that in there still.
I did see pictures from inside from someone else who got to go to the lion dance this weekend. I'm like, oh, yeah. But that's wonderful. would love to be able to go to the Wing Luke Museum in order to actually just see, just such a cool place of preserved cultural heritage. I was lucky enough that my mom and my family, my mom was also an archaeologist, brought me there when I was younger. So I was able to experience a larger Chinese community when I was younger. And I think it just started this love for just this amazing culture that we still have in the United States.
And it's those pictures of the chop suey and the can and stuff, that's not what my family eats.
Yeah.
I'm like nothing like that, a lot of steamy stuff, and a lot of not that.
I just love showing that particular picture because that brand rose into the 1980s. And so a lot of families would have had chop suey or chow mein noodles.
Yeah.
There's a lot of history behind that can.
But when you go to Hong Kong or China, you will never have chop suey chow mein on it.
No,
Nor fortune cookies.
no.
Yeah.
Those are the same.
I believe that's San Francisco based as well. Fortune cookies?
I don't know where it came from.
Think San Francisco, but yeah, absolutely. It's quite fascinating just to look at how, in order to have Chinese restaurants have that buy-in, they create things like chop suey or fortune cookies.
My dad would tell me like, that's exactly right, like it was all the leftover pieces and stuff that nobody wanted to eat, that they would serve to people.
Yeah.
Like scraps, you know,
Yeah.
but certainly.
I love one of the other terms for chop suey is fried miscellaneous.
So,
What's the thing? You can look at so many different recipes of chop suey, and really the vegetables kind of just spread about kind of what you have. I think I saw, yes.
Yeah, so if you're talking, if we're talking about people bringing things all the way from Seattle, and then of course all the way from China, would it have been the case that these are things that were important enough to people that they were willing to pay a lot more than they would pay back home, or was there a way of keeping prices low? Or was that actually comparable to a lot of the goods coming in Montana?
I mean, again, I'd have to do a little bit more research on that, but I think in the very beginning, when we still are in like Montana territory, 1860s, 1870s, 1880s, it was an expression of cultural identity.
Yeah.
Like one of the photos I don't have in this PowerPoint, but I have in the publication is a rice bowl with the bamboo pattern painted on it. And so we're in an abandoned mining camp in western Montana, kind of in the middle of nowhere, but you still have these rice bowls. And so I think from my research early on, as immigration waves were coming into Montana, when you had these items, you took them with you, they were small, they could be on your person, but they represented part of your identity in a place that was very unfamiliar. But I think as we move on towards the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, when we start getting bigger populations, we start getting more established restaurants and eateries, it does become part of heritage identity and memory, but also like you were saying, they were things were prepared in, and you would have different items that were in your home.
also, if you had family members, like we had family members in Canada or San Francisco, they would send stuff from those bigger enclaves up to us.
And I believe, if I remember, Crystal Wong Shore's oral histories, Ruby Wong, when she left Helena, she left all of her personal goods in Helena and just had a fresh start in this. Yeah. All right, is there any more questions I can answer?
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you guys so much.